Phronesis. Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this beautiful world. My name is Scott Allen, and I am the host of Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. I am an associate professor of management at John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio, USA. I'm an author, an entrepreneur, a speaker, a nonprofit founder, and the host of 2 podcasts. I'm also a husband and dad of 3. You just heard from Kate, my daughter, who wrote and performed the Phronesis intro. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion on all things leadership. My guests are scholars and practitioners, and we cover timely, relevant topics and incorporate practical tips designed to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Now, I am proud to share that Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association, an association that is near and dear to my heart. ILA brings together leaders and those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ilaglobalnetwork.org. If you like what we're up to, please click subscribe so you can stay up to date as we release new episodes each week. You can also share what we're up to with others. And now, today's show. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome to the Phronesis podcast. Today, I am with Christie Navarro. Christie is at the University of California at Davis. She is the director at the Center for Leadership Learning at Cal Davis. And we've known each other, Christie, probably for a few years now through other circles. But today we're going to talk about the National Leadership Symposium. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's an event I've never attended. And you just told me you've been attending since 2014.
Absolutely, yes. So my first time having the NLS experience was back in 2014. And I was just so impacted by that experience that I attended every year. And even, now serving as co-chair. Yeah.
Tell me about that first year. What was it? And what is it about this experience? I've never attended, as I said. Okay. It's always been on the radar, but I've never made it. And so tell me about what it was in that 2014 experience that kind of captured you and then even fostered a sense, at least eventually, for you to get involved and serve as co-chair. That's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. So with the National Leadership Symposium, it is very different. It's not a conference, right? Yeah. So it is a small cohort of leadership educators, like-minded, folks from all around the nation that come together and have this intensive learning experience, dialogue, conversation around topics related to leadership. And so it was that intense experience having scholars in residence, every year. It's a different theme every year. And having access, that close access to these scholars, to these practitioners, faculty, experts in the field, to have that direct connection and ask questions and be able to work again in small groups and have those deeper conversations and exploration around topics that we all do get through a traditional conference experience, but sometimes we're always so rushed, right? To go to one session, to go to the next session, or I want to meet up with this person or connect with that colleague. And with the symposium, because it's a cohort, a small group, you are there with 3 full days, with these folks having these deeper conversations. And that is what impacted me so much that I, again, just committed to attending a symposium every single year. And then to get to that question about being a co-chair, I was very flattered and felt honored to give back in this way. Craig Slack, most of us know, good old Craig, just kind of called me up one day and just said, hey, would you like to volunteer and serve as a co-chair? It is a 2-year position. Of course, with COVID, I'm going to extend into a 3rd year, but I was just so honored to just be able to give back. I'm able to see it from the participant view. And then also now, the co-chair view of the preparation behind the scenes and working with the scholars and getting the schedule together. And so it's just been an amazing experience.
So you said that it was a small cohort. Would you tell me a little bit about that? And I imagine over 4 days, you get to know some people pretty well. You build relationships.
Definitely build relationships. Absolutely. So what's beautiful is, the cohort, it is also an experience that I would recommend for maybe a more seasoned leadership educator, maybe a graduate student or a new professional. I mean, always welcome completely. But because it is a more of an intense conversation and experience and expectation too, it's definitely a hands-on experiential time that you have. So there are going to be projects, or there will be maybe small group presentations. It just depends on the theme for the year. So that's why sometimes having a little bit more of experience might be recommended. But having again a cohort of 40 to 50 folks that have similar experiences as you, as being in higher ed, being involved in leadership education. I have met folks from smaller liberal arts colleges, or folks like myself, with at UC Davis. It's a public research, one institution. And so it's just such a diverse collection community that is actually created in those 3.5 days. And so it's just such an amazing, different, impactful experience. Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about the role of these? You've mentioned scholars and residents. So
yes.
I know my friend Tony Middlebrooks is one of those scholars and residents this coming year. That's really how we got. But I don't have a clear understanding of what their role is. And maybe does their role shift every year depending on the topic?
Roles do shift a little bit. You're right. It depends on the theme and the topic that we're tackling. What I've seen consistently over the years with the scholars is, they're bringing their area of expertise, their area of research, their area of experience, and also personal experience, personal lived experiences to the table. Scholars are infused. They're there, to help drive the content, to help drive the conversation, the dialogue, guide again the participants, those that are in attendance, through that conversation that we're having. For instance, for this year, so we have 3 outstanding, phenomenal scholars, Dr. V. Chanu, as you mentioned, Anthony or Tony Middlebrooks with the University of Delaware. And we also have Nyasha Guramontun Cooper, who is with Our Lady of the Lake, that is joining us. And so again, 3 very diverse voices, diverse areas of expertise around culturally relevant leadership, identifying our own positionality and how our own identity influences our work as leadership educators. And then Tony Middlebrooks, he will be bringing in some of his experience around design thinking. And so we have that. Then this year is just an example, but every year it's just amazing the synergy that is created among the visiting scholars, or the resident scholars as we call them. And the synergy that happens, again, around just these topics that we want to dig deeper into.
So how does that work? Is it the co-chairs that work with Craig? Or I know Craig is now retiring. Is it the co-chairs that help identify the topic or the theme for the year? How does that unfold?
Yeah, so there is a planning team that does incorporate the co-chairs. And now, yes, as you said, Craig is retiring. When we were in person, the site coordinator. And so we come together as just a small planning team and start thinking about what are some topics again, or maybe, some kind of cutting edge, forward thinking type of topics that we can, or that we need to discuss within our field. And so from there is when we start thinking about, okay, well, who is in our networks, or who may be, putting out some current research, or maybe has written, this fabulous new book that fits the topic of what we want to explore. And so it's usually historically, again, Craig, it's just so well networked that he seems to know everyone in our field. And so it's been very nice, that connection to start reaching out, to these scholars. And so it's a lot of time, that the scholars do volunteer for, and step into that role, as we do have many planning meetings, on a monthly basis and all of those types of details. But again, everyone is just usually so passionate around that year's theme, and is just there's so much synergy, right? That occurs, that we all come together and just organically create, this very immersive, impactful experience, for the participants.
This year, the experience is virtual, correct?
Yes, we are. Last year we went virtual, and this year we're going to need to be virtual again. We're hoping in 2022 we will be back at the University of Tampa, which is a common location. The symposium over the years has moved around a bit. Yeah. around the nation. I do hope one day that y'all come out to UC Davis, but that's another conversation. So in 2022, we will be in person, but for this year, we need to be virtual. And so the symposium will be July 12th through July 14th this year. And our topic is disruption by design, co-creating our approach to leadership education.
Tony and I worked on we're working on the second edition of that textbook. He's
nice.
taken leadership principles and really provided this beautiful design frame to the whole conversation. And so I love that phrasing. I love that title. That's a really, really cool title of an experience. As listeners are experiencing this podcast, they still have time to register. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, there is. Because the symposium is an intensive cohort-based experience. And when I mean intensive, there's going to be some reading and some work that you need to do, right? There are some pre-readings that the scholars have identified. It's not to the degree where you will feel that you're back in like graduate school or like working towards your Ph.D. So it won't be that intense, but there will be a few articles. We are getting a little creative. The scholars have recorded their own video of their biography. And so you'll need to watch that. So there's some preparatory work. So we are recommending that, if anyone's interested, to try and register by July 1, July 2. But of course, if you register the day before, completely fine. Since we're virtual, we can be much more flexible with that. But just know that there's going to be a project that you'll be working on as well to really dig deeper and figuring out how you can redesign a program or a set curriculum, an activity that you have to really look at, again, through that lens of positionality, identity, culturally relevant leadership, being more, again, broad and intentional on how we are serving all students from all diverse backgrounds.
Let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's talk about that topic. What are some of your perspectives on that topic, Christie? What do you think?
I appreciate that question, and thank you, because this is an area that I'm very passionate about, of bringing in diverse voices to the table in our field. I think that there's been a lack of the opportunity for scholars from different backgrounds, different lived experiences, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color quite often aren't brought to the table, or especially when it's trying to push and advance our conversations around what leadership is. Yeah. And how we define leadership. What are those skills, the knowledge base that we look to teach, students, but then how those skill sets and that knowledge is often rooted within the dominant culture and what that looks like. Yep. And so I think for me personally, this is just, Christie speaking, that I see our field can do a much better job at that. And with the experience that we've all have gone through collectively together with the pandemic, with the increase in a long time conversation around equity and racial justice, social justice, I feel that what we've seen in 2020, we can't go back to what we were doing in 2019, right? And so, this is me just humbly trying to put that idea out there for our field of how is it that we are going to adjust, shift, and change to ensure that we are representing, hearing, and inviting all communities to the table. And so again, one way that we're going to try and start that conversation is with this year's theme with the symposium. Want to challenge participants to examine their own positionality and their own identity and how it impacts their work as leadership educators. We want to engage in that deeper reflection to disrupt those normative thoughts and traditional views of leadership and how we can expand that. Want to intentionally create inclusive learning opportunities. And so these are some of the areas, again, that we want to have that deeper conversation within the symposium that the symposium is known for. right?
Yeah.
The symposium is known for, again, that more intimate, intense experience among leadership educators.
Well, it makes it two things. About 3 years ago now, I had a student, her name was Sarah, and this is in a graduate program, and this is towards the beginning of the semester. And it was a leadership course. And in the context of this class, we have a lot of accountants. So a goal of mine was to get some accountants to the room to help the accounting students understand why this topic of leadership is so incredibly important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it ends up that there's kind of 4 white men sitting up there at the front of the class. And Sarah walked up to me afterwards and she said, this was great. I enjoyed it and I learned. And it was also just like every other, in my case, John Carroll experience that I've had as an undergraduate, that like, once again, it's just everyone up there not looking like me. And it would be wonderful if we could have some other perspectives. And that just has stuck with me. It has just stuck with me. So there's that dimension that was just I will forever remember Sarah's name. And every time I'm planning something, her voice is in my head. And then a second experience I had at ILA in Ottawa. This is a couple of years ago, International Leadership Association conference. A young graduate student wanted to have a conversation with me. And so we set up a time to have coffee. And she was in graduate school and she was of Asian descent. And she made a comment to me that said, she suggested that a lot of the type of programming we do turns her peers off.
Yes.
And again, something that will always just stick with me. And so we got into the conversation a little bit and I probed a little bit. It wasn't too in depth, but that was so interesting. That was so fascinating to me that I was completely oblivious to that perspective. How would even how we design our programs ever turn people off? Well, they totally require you to be extroverted for 3 days sometimes, right?
Right. Absolutely.
But those two experiences really, in a very interesting way, have just stuck with me. And I think it's an important conversation because at times I'm just not even aware and I need to be. And being more intentional sometimes about what we're putting into motion and becoming more aware of our own blind spots and opportunities to create more inclusive environments. It's important. It just is.
Right. Thank you for sharing, those two stories. That's just beautiful. And that's exactly what to convey is that we need to really stop and think and be very reflective and critical. And that's sometimes a hard thing, to do. We all, I think, we all, meaning, leadership educators specifically, in this context, we're all well-intentioned, right? But we really need to stop and think about what is it that we are not only creating and also teaching. I know we, at least in circles that I'm in, we talk a lot about access. And yes, how do we provide access for, many communities on our campus? And yes, UC Davis is a fairly, diverse campus. Yeah. But it's my responsibility to think about, well, if students, even from my own community as, a Latina, are not coming to our programs as often as maybe as another community, is there something that I am doing wrong in that? And I think it's, again, not just about having those diverse students just represented participating in our programs, but really thinking about what is it, again, I call it like those messages, or that content, or who am I bringing and inviting as guest speakers, as folks that I am saying, hey, this is a very experienced, knowledgeable leader for what they've accomplished or their lived experience. And so I really need to think about, as a leadership educator, just as you shared, of what, again, are we putting forward?
Yep.
And in regards to, again, having those diverse voices, having those diverse perspectives, and also with what I'm creating with our curricula and, our assessment of being very adamant about leadership. Even though we say, right, that leadership does not look one way, or there's not one right way to be a leader, sometimes with that curricula, or again, those measurements, we fall into that because we're looking and we're trying to check off this skill or they demonstrated this ability. But we also need to stop and think about who is setting those standards, who is establishing that.
Yeah.
Where is that coming from? Because there could be a student of color who may be demonstrating what we think that leadership is, but because it doesn't look in a certain way that we think it's supposed to look, then we dismiss that.
Yeah.
Then we miss it.
Yep.
And so I think, having these more, again, deeper critical conversations around this is just it's a long time coming. And I think it's something that we need to have start having more frequently and with more people. But I think, again, with what we've all experienced in 2020, now I think more people are aware, have their eyes open. And I think this is a perfect opportunity, right, to start advancing our field a little bit more in this regard.
It's very, very well said. And there's a book. So Christie, this reminds me of a quote from Stephanie Johnson in a paper that she wrote in a book called What's Wrong with Leadership? The data used to derive most leadership theories and recommendations was collected by male researchers from male leaders, and it was analyzed and interpreted by mostly male scientists. And we could also just say white male there if we're going to be totally transparent with what's going on.
Exactly. Absolutely. And 100%. There's been, more discussion, I feel, especially with the work by John Dugan about deconstructing leadership theory. And so I think, again, with his work, with the work that you just shared, Stephanie Johnson.
Yeah.
And, it hits the nail, right on the head.
Yes.
We really need to have those deeper conversations and take a step back and be willing to do that, and I've noticed that you have said, a few times, like, I've been blind to this, or I didn't realize this. And that is a wonderful thing to hear from you, Scott. I want to thank you and commend you for that, because it starts with that recognition and taking ownership. And recognizing that doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't make you a bad leadership educator. You have that awareness. And now, most importantly, what am I going to do from now? That conversation with Sarah, changed you. That other, conversations that you shared, take that and you think about, what can I do differently? Yep. And I think that's what we all need to be doing.
Exactly. We are all... Yeah. Every one of us works in progress that have great strengths and areas of growth and development. And well, I'm so excited that you all are creating this space, and I will be excited to hear how this year's experience goes. I think it's just a wonderful cast of scholars, resident scholars, like you said. And I also love that framing of design, because I think it does require some design. When I think of the word design, I think of intentionality. I think about expertise and looking at options. And all too often, at least in my past, I haven't been intentional or haven't designed in certain ways. So I think for every one of us, there's a wonderful opportunity there. So, Christie, anything you've been reading or listening to or streaming or watching that's caught your eye in the last few months that you want listeners to know about? Could have something to do about leadership, or it could just be something totally different.
Well, I have been doing a lot of reading. So some books, that I've been reading, The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart by Alicia Garza, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. Of course, Kathy Guthrie's and Carmen Beatty's new book, Engaging the Leadership Process, Identity, Capacity, and Efficacy, for college students. And so I've just been, dabbling again into culturally relevant leadership and just really going through the process of re-examining, my own positionality, my own lived experience, my own voice, and how that impacts the work that I do. That's where my head has been.
You are a lifelong learner. I am a lifelong learner. Listeners, obviously, if you've made it this far, you are lifelong learners. And that's a great way to be. That's a great way to be. Yes,
absolutely.
I will put information about the symposium in the show notes so listeners can find that there. And Christie, thank you so much for being with me today. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for the work that you do. And I look forward to our paths crossing soon.
Yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Scott.
My conversation with Christie really reminded me of a previous conversation. It may have been the second episode of Phronesis, this whole series. And it was with John Wergen. And that episode was titled, It Has to Be with Others. Part of our learning is about learning in community. And this experience, the NLS experience, provides learners, as Christie said, mid-career learners potentially, with an opportunity to learn, develop, and grow in community. So that as educators, we too are continuing to advance our own ways of knowing and ways of being when it comes to this topic of leadership. So check out the show notes. Look at what they have going on this summer. It's an incredible program, and I'm excited to hear how it goes. I want to say thank you to Christie for being with me today. And everybody, have a great day, no matter where you are in the world. And here's a challenge for you. Maybe that mentor, that individual that really made a difference in your life somewhere along the way, that person who had a conversation with you that was incredibly transformational, pop them a quick note, say thank you, ask them to have a great day, and let them know that they've made a difference in your life. Be well. You, my friend, have just finished another episode of Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. To get in touch with me, visit www.scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I can also be found on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Now, if you have feedback, I would love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening to Phronesis. If you like Phronesis, I have a second podcast. It's called the Captovation Podcast. That's with an O, Captovation Podcast, where I speak with experts on the topic of designing and delivering incredible presentations. And now, Kate's twin sister, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.